What tight end might the Cowboys have their eye on day 3 of the NFL draft, and who best fits Kellen Moore's offense? All that and more on this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Cowboys. Locked On Cowboys.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We want to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We are free and available on all platforms. I am Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. He is Landon McCool. You can check him out at McCoolBCB. Landon, today we are talking about day 3 tight ends, maybe late day 2 tight ends. I've got a feeling that one of these tight ends that we're going to talk about today, you really like for the Cowboys. Am I wrong?
Ooh, maybe. It depends. Like, I think we had a conversation earlier in the week about one of these guys that I thought was tight end one. I may have changed my tune over the last 2 days of kind of watching a couple of these guys. So we'll see. We'll see.
All right. Yeah. Well, let's go ahead and start there. So we're gonna look at some tight ends that the Cowboys could probably get somewhere between the 3rd and 5th round, because it feels like that's where the Cowboys are leaning right now, right? Yep. They want, obviously, to get another tight end in here to develop, to play behind Dalton Schultz this year, maybe replace him down the road. I want to start with Cade Otton, who was a 30 visit for the Cowboys. I believe he already had his visit. Not a ton of college production. I believe it's like less than 1,000 yards in college for Washington. But what did you think about Cade Otton when you watched this film?
Well, to be fully clear, this was the guy that I told Marcus a couple of days ago that I thought was tight end one. And, you know, I think just to kind of preface this whole conversation with saying this isn't a great tight end class. You know, there's not like a top end name that's exciting anyone. Certainly not anything like Pitts from last season, but not even really like a solid, you know, mid to late first round choice. Really not even too much of a second round choice. I mean, you can talk what you want about Trey Mcbride, who is not one of the guys we're talking about, but I mean, I honestly don't know if I even like him there. So when I called Cade Otton my tight end one a few weeks ago, it wasn't like, oh, this guy's a top, 60 pick or anything like that. I would frankly be surprised if he was taken in the 3rd round. I mean, probably the 3rd round is actually, now that I say this, where these guys are going to go, because there's just not a ton of them, right? So scarcity will drive up the cost. So with Cade Otton, 6'5", 247, he's got 32 3/4 inch arms. He's got good size for a tight end. Obviously, I mean, he's a little bit undersized. He is kind of he's not like the full sized inline wide tight end. He's got good muscle bulk in his arms and thighs. Mostly lined up in line. I mean, mostly was lined up as the Y. I think he had great temperament and effort as a blocker, which I think is a huge thing. Like you could tell that he enjoys blocking. It's not just like a job that he has to do. The first snap I ever saw of Cade Otton, I was watching the Michigan tape, and I watched him stalemate Aiden Hutchinson in a one-on-one pass blocking situation. There were several impressive reps against that Michigan defensive line where he was able to, both in run blocking and pass pro. I thought that showed a lot against, guys like Ajabo, against Hutchinson. There's talent across that defensive line, up and down. So he's a hands catcher. He can reach and grab the ball away from his body, which is a nice thing to see for a guy that, you kind of are considering to be a blocking tight end. I think he's tight end to H-back sized, and frankly, kind of all these guys are, we'll talk about Ruckert, but I mean, frankly, these are all kind of similarly sized guys. They're all not really kind of full wide tight ends yet. He could struggle at times to separate at the top of his routes. I think he's, we talked about, I think one of the things that you and I talked about was he needs to be a little bit more subtle at times with kind of his push off a little bit. And he just struggles in general. He doesn't have great change of direction. So he's not great at those kind of stop routes or, those sort of things. Like, I think that's not necessarily his game. He's very smooth, but he's not twitchy. I actually thought his 2020 tape looked better than his 2021 tape.
I agree.
And I think it makes some sense that he was kind of highly thought coming into the season after going back and looking at it. Where does he win? He's a very good blocker with reliable receiving skills, which I think makes him a rosterable and playable player. Unanswered questions. He can refine his routes and improve his hand technique, but outside of that, how much better can he get as a receiver? He doesn't have any athleticism upside there. So I don't know that there's like a lot of room for him to grow as an athlete. I would say.
We should mention that he didn't do any testing because he hurt his ankle, I believe, in November. So no combine testing, no workout stuff. But NFL Draft Scout, which they get all these verified times for the pro days a year before, because a lot of times these guys will still run. It's like a 4.73, which is it's not great. Right. It's not terrible. But when you look at his size, his college production, his athleticism, and I think the blocking technique, he reminds me a lot of Dalton Schultz as a prospect. Now, I don't know if he's as good as Dalton Schultz after the catch. I think that's the one spot where Schultz is a little bit better.
Yeah.
But I think you're talking about a very similar prospect to Schultz, who developed into a really nice tight end. Do you agree?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think if from the Cowboys perspective, I'm sure they're looking at this guy and saying, okay, much like Schultz, this is a guy who has more developed blocking techniques than you would normally anticipate for a tight end coming into the NFL, right? And that's something that you can work with, right? Because I think, working on the route improvement, working on the kind of smaller parts of the game, that's something that's easier to kind of develop as a tight end. But if you're having to like start from scratch and teaching this guy to help him understand leverage,
then you can't get those guys on the field, right? You can't get a second and third tight end on the field if they can't block. Right.
And honestly, that's kind of, speaking of an overarching 10,000 foot view of all this, that's the problem I have when doing a lot of these tight end evaluations is that, well, if you're not like X level of receiver and you can't block at all, then why wouldn't I just put a wide receiver on the field instead of you, right? Like if you're not like such a good receiver of the football as a tight end and you can't block, what's the benefit of me drafting you and developing you when I can just develop a wide receiver 4? You know what I'm saying? Okay. So I think with Otten, he can block. He's good enough as a receiver that, he can be your last end option if he goes out and route. And frankly, I think he's one of the few guys in this class that if you put him out there, he could also be a pass blocker. I mean, you wouldn't want to assign him one-on-one with like they did with Hutchinson, like all the time.
But if you're going to put Terrence Steele and him together to block a Myles Garrett, right? You're fine with that.
Exactly. Yeah, I think he's one of the few guys that I think has some talent as not only a run blocker, but also as a pass blocker if he wanted that.
I don't think he's got the traits to be like a George Kittle or Travis Kelce or something like that, because he's not that type of athlete. No. But if you're looking for somebody to be a Dalton Schultz level of tight end, like somewhere between, let's say, like the 8th and 14th best tight end in the league, I can see it with him. Like I just could see a situation where he gets into an offense that's really good, and he's kind of the 4th or 5th passing option. He catches everything. He's a good enough blocker. I like him. Like 3rd, 4th round, I think that makes a lot of sense for the Cowboys.
Yeah, I think he's just a solid pick. He's not flashy. He's not exciting. His metrics and the notes from SIS aren't exactly going to blow you away. He's not, he can break some tackles. I mean, he's pretty decent with catching the football, but he's not like a yak guy at all. No. He's not like a guy that's going to be a dynamic threat. He'll catch the football if you throw it to him. But don't expect him to be a large part of your game plan.
Is it fair to say he's somewhere between Dalton Schultz and Sean McEwen? I think he's closer to Schultz than McEwen, but that level of player, right?
Sure. Yeah, I think in that sense that you're looking for a balanced tight end who's not exceptionally flashy at either aspect of the game.
But when you're picking late 3rd round, what do the Cowboys pick? 84, something like that?
I think.
88?
Right? Yeah.
This is the kind of tight end you get. And if he turns into being something close to Dalton Schultz, 90% of Dalton Schultz, you got to be really happy with that, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think that, you draft this guy maybe not as your solution for moving forward as well, but as a guy that you can have as a very solid tight end too. Because even if Schultz leaves next year, I'm not sure that I want this. I don't know that a year from now that I'm going to want Cade Otton as my number 1 tight end necessarily. I would want him in a room with other guys as part of a rotation. He's not. I don't think he's like I don't know that he develops into a guy that is your number one tight end full time. I think he'll always be best functional as part of a rotation,
which is fine with me. Again, you're talking about pick 88, pick 129 or whatever they draft. That's perfectly fine. I can get behind Cade Otton there. I actually really like him. I think in a league that just doesn't have many tight ends that are good blockers and adequate receivers, I think he's going to be just fine in the NFL. All right, let's take a quick break so we can tell you guys about BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all of your betting needs and sports info. Find all of the latest sports developments, including the odds for this week's Masters Championship, which Landon had to pull me away from watching to do this podcast. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, let's talk about another tight end that's expected to go in around the same range as Cade Otton, and that's Jeremey Ruckert from Ohio State. This is somebody who I think early on in the draft process, Landon, people thought could maybe be tight end 1, but he didn't do anything either during any of the combine or pro day stuff. And it feels like his stock has fallen a little bit. But what did you think about Ruckert when you put on the tape?
Well, I gotta say, going back to watch Ruckert is what changed my mind about Cade Otton being tight end 1. I think I liked Ruckert a lot going into this process. Kind of just doing a very initial, kind of watch through of names that we thought that we would be looking at. And then kind of going back this week and rewatching him, I really did like the player a lot. Again, very kind of similar size, 6'5", 250. He's got bigger hands. He's got over 10-inch hands, almost 32 3/4-inch arms. Nice wingspan. He didn't run a 40, but NFL Draft Scout had him estimated as like 4.62 to 4.72, and they're pretty good about usually estimating those sort of things. Just some notes from SIS. He was 9th in the class with a 6.0 yak per reception. So he is pretty decent once he gets the ball at producing and kind of getting upfield. He's not like an elusive type, but I think he is good about getting the ball quickly and then turning upfield. He was producing at 0.5 EPA per game, which is pretty decent. He's got pretty good at his run block blown percentages, which means that he's able to stick on the blocks that he's using. In the film notes, NFL tight end body, tall, long arms with filled out frame. He's got thick arms and legs. He lines up all over. You see him as a Y and F, a slot. I see him kind of out wide. Very much has an all around skill set. I mean, more so maybe than anybody in this class, and that's kind of why I liked him a lot. Mm-hmm. Lots of use as a blocker and in multiple ways. He's arc blocking. He's on the line. He's even pass blocking if you need it. He wasn't very heavily targeted in obviously a very crowded Ohio State offense. I think there's a reason that Williams transferred to Alabama as a wide receiver, and it's not like they had a ton of extra snaps or I guess ton of extra receptions for a tight end. But he takes advantage of the snaps that he gets. He does make a lot of great catches, but he can definitely work on kind of securing the easy catch. It felt like there were a couple times when I saw some concentration drops. Where does he win? I think he's a blocking tight end, but he's also a red zone weapon. I think he can be a guy that, near the goal line, he has a good catch radius. He has strong hands. He will be valuable in the red zone as a guy that you can get the ball to. The unanswered question, is his ceiling a high end tight end 2? Like, is that all that he really can become? Or can he kind of elevate himself even further to kind of a tight end 1 level? I question it because, again, I think he has a little bit better athleticism just on tape than what we saw from Otten. But I don't know if it's, enough to really, like I said, be more than just a really nice tight end 2 on your roster.
I compared him to Blake Bell as a player. And I know maybe Bell's a little bit more athletic, but I think you're getting that type of player, a really solid tight end 2 or tight end 3 with some better than average athleticism, pretty physical blocker that you can put in space and stuff. I don't know if you're going to get a lot from him as a receiver. I actually trust Otten, I think, a little bit more as a pass catcher than Ruckert, but Ruckert didn't get a lot of chances either. So I could be wrong with that one too.
I understand what you're saying. I think, Otten is a guy that has you just see a lot more of it on tape, especially in 2020, right? And with Ruckert, it's like the blocking is all there. It's like a fully formed prospect. You see the blocking tight end on tape, right? With the receiving stuff, it's more flashes, right? Like there's times when you see him make a really great play, and you're like, wow, like that's pretty good for a guy that you kind of are considering a blocking tight end. So, but yeah, I mean, there's obviously a reason that he wasn't a featured receiver in that offense necessarily, and part of that obviously has to do with the guys that are also in that offense. So. I think he's an interesting guy because, honestly, he could come in. I feel like I have a pretty good idea of what Otten's going to do when he comes in. Ruckert, like it could be, here from here to there. And it's hard to tell because of his usage, the injury, a lot of different factors.
And I'll admit I might be biased because I kind of felt like he was just like every other Ohio State tight end that we've seen over the last decade, right? The Nick Vannett, the Luke Farrell, all these guys that are good blockers, good athletes, but just really aren't dynamic receiving threats. I kind of think Ruckert falls into that same category. For me, I think he's more of a 4th round guy, an early day 3 pick, but I won't be shocked if somebody gambles on him in the late 3rd. A big school, with a good blocker, good athleticism, I could see it.
I think that the red zone stuff to me is what makes him more valuable than a normal like blocking tight end, right? Okay. Like I think that he can provide you some value as just a big, target that has a lot of catch radius, kind of in those areas where you need tight spots. He has enough athleticism to get up and get the football if you need him to. But yeah, I mean, it's not such that he's like a dynamic threat that you have to get the ball to. Like it's not quite that way.
We should also mention that Ruckert is a 30 visit for the Cowboys, as well as Cade Otton. Of these two tight ends, which one do you think better fits Kellen Moore's offense?
I see their usage very similar. So I don't think that there's like one that's necessarily better than the other. I will say this. I think these two are a better fit than the third guy that we'll talk about for sure.
What about compared to some of the other tight ends that we looked at? Charlie Kohler from Iowa State. I like Kohler a lot. I think Otten's probably a better fit. I go either way on Ruckert, but what do you think?
I honestly think that Kohler, Ruckert, and Otten are all kind of right in the same tier for me, right? Like I think Kohler's a little bit more of a receiving tight end than a blocker. Like, so maybe if you flip those percentages or something like that, like you get him. But I think the results of the overall skill sets are very similar level, right? So if you want the more receiving kind of guy, maybe you go get Kohler. If you need that more, inline blocking, like that's going to be his assignment.
Yes.
Then you go get a Ruckert or an Otten.
And then they also brought in Jelani Woods, the massive tight end for Virginia. I think he goes way earlier than the guys that we're talking about here.
I think he's the tight end one, to be honest, because of the upside, right?
Because
I think the universal tight end one, I would say, like not necessarily my favorite tight end, but I think as far as with all that upside, he's close enough to these guys on a production level and a skill set level already.
Yep.
That like you can project that he will be better by year 2 than all these guys. So I think that makes sense.
So between Kohler, Ruckert, and Otten, are you okay just waiting to see which guy is available on day 3? And if you have to trade up in the 4th round to go get one, do that. Or is there one that you would be like, you know what, 3rd round, pick 88, I'm good with it there?
Look, this is going to sound like I don't care or like these guys, but honestly, I don't think that any of them is so much better than the other one that you feel like you need to go grab one.
That's kind of the way I feel. That's exactly the way I feel. But just let's get to the 3rd day of the draft. Let's look at what the board is like and see how much it would cost to go up and try to get one of these, 2 guys that's available. Because I've got a feeling that 2 of these 3 will be available early on in day 3.
I agree.
Wouldn't be surprising at all. All right, we've got one more guy that we need to talk about, Landon, and I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on this tight end. It's a former Oklahoma tight end. Is it Grant Calcaterra? Is how you say it? Calcaterra?
Calcaterra, I think is, yeah.
You're going to have to sell me on this one because I just didn't see it when I watched the tape. Well, what did you see?
I mean, you're talking to the wrong dude if you're trying to get me to sell this guy to you.
Okay, here, let me put it like this.
Yeah.
I don't see him as a priority pick. For me, priority picks are the first 4 rounds, right? Once we get into the 5th, 6th round, it doesn't really matter, right? You're basically, there's no difference between the guys you're drafting there and you're going to sign as undrafted free agents. But if you want to draft this guy in the 5th, what's that?
Yeah, do you think he makes it there? Like, 'cause that's my thing, right? Is that I feel like this guy is going to be drafted before I'm willing to pick him. Is basically where I'm at. Unless you think otherwise.
The consensus board has him as like a 5th or 6th round pick right now.
I could easily see somebody selling themselves on this guy and drafting him in the 3rd round. I could. Let's talk about him real quick. What
did you see on tape?
I see a guy, he's 6'4", 241. So again, all these guys are kind of within an inch, within 9 pounds of each other. But he's the slightly smaller one. He's got 10-inch hands, 33.25-inch arms. Ran a 4.62 40 which was nice. A 1.62 10-yard split. Again, those are good numbers for a tight end. But he is, again, shorter, lighter. He's a smaller tight end. Those other guys were already kind of on the smaller end of average, right, for an NFL tight end. But this guy's underneath all that, right? He's below that as far as size goes. He does have good arm length and good hand size, like for his body. The next note in my notes is, I mean, I literally used red flag emojis. He's an older prospect due to temporary retirement from football because of concussion issues. I mean, that's the big red blinking light with this situation, right? So beyond that, right, he lined up as a wing, inline, in the slot, in the backfield. He's very agile. He's a smooth mover. His feet move well. He's confident. I mean, obviously that comes with having a lot of experience. I mean, he played a lot. He played enough at Oklahoma, and then he got a lot of snaps at SMU. He accelerates really well for a big target. He's a quick react athlete. He's not, despite the fact that he's kind of quick and big for his size, he's very much not a tackle breaker. So he's going to catch the ball, and as soon as he gets hit, he's going to fall down.
Yep.
And really just not a factor as a blocker at all. I mean, he can get in the way, but he just doesn't offer. He offers zero pop in his game. I saw him a couple times kind of leave his feet to try to block guys. Like, it just doesn't necessarily look like he knows what he's doing there as much. Where does he win? He's a route running tight end. I mean, that's basically what he is. He's a guy that can go out there and run routes pretty well. And, my unanswered question is kind of the whole thing with him, right? Is his one-dimensional game valuable enough to put him on the field instead of a wide receiver? And that combined with this, not kind of an unknown with the concussions, like, to me, I would have him off my board. Like, I because the concussion things are huge. I mean, obviously.
He doesn't even know how many he's had. They've asked him about it. He said, I have no idea.
And he's 26. He needs a lot.
I got his official age, by the way. It's not as old as you think. It's 23 and a half.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good. That is good. So, so
there were some bad rumors out on the internet, but yeah, it's 23 and a half.
That's good. So that I will say that is better than we expect. That doesn't change much though, because again, and this kind of goes back to the kind of what we were talking about earlier, right? Like, if you're a route running tight end who offers nothing as a blocker, then you need to be special in that category.
You should have special athleticism, right? Which his athleticism is fine. He ran a 4.62 at 241. It's fine.
But that's the issue, special. Right? Is that if that's your defining trait, and really that's your only defining trait, then you've got to clear the bar of what my wide receiver 4 can provide.
Yes.
Right? Because otherwise, why am I drafting you, developing you, when your job could essentially be done by Noah Brown?
Yep.
So I think that's my
size difference isn't really there either, right? You're a 240-pound tight end.
Yeah. And if you're not going to block, if you don't have Noah Brown's got experience blocking defensive ends. I've got a guy who plays wide receiver who's a much better receiver than you are. And he can be as good a blocker, and he's cheap. why am I drafting this guy, losing the opportunity cost to develop him? I think that's the issue I have with some of these tight ends is that, it's just not enough for me to take the pick when I can cobble together your production very easily with what I have on my roster already.
You might already have this guy on the team in Simi Fehoko, right? Who is 6'4", 225 pounds, and ran a 4.44 40-yard dash. Fehoko can't block, but neither could Katera, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I don't see this one for Dallas unless it's just one of those 5th-round picks, and we just want to get him into the building and keep him on the practice squad for a year. Let's kind of see what happens. But he shouldn't be mentioned in the same tier as those other tight ends we were talking about.
He's got a long ways to go.
Yeah.
If he can develop as a blocker enough to, get him on the field, then we're talking, right? But I think he's like at least a year plus away from being good enough as a blocker to be useful to deploy on the field. Right?
I think he's a year away from being a year away. Truly. Maybe. I think he's a ways away from playing. Again,
I wouldn't draft this guy simply because of all the things that we said. Not that he's undraftable. I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't put him, as an UDFA as ranking. I'm just saying I would put him on the 5th and then pretend like I didn't see him when
let me ask you this.
Rolled around to him.
Jalen Weidemeyer, the tight end from Texas A&M. Are you more open to drafting him in the 5th or 6th round, even though he has athleticism that would rival us?
I could run a 5-foot. No, come on, just kidding. I probably would. I probably have more. They're really just mirror images of each other, right? Like,
I don't know what you do. Honestly, these are two of the guys that are the hardest to figure out. I probably would gamble on. I just don't know if Weidemeyer cares, right? Because if you're a D1 athlete and you have a 25-inch vertical, it shows me you don't care, right?
Yeah. I probably would go with Katera.
I probably would as well.
Because I think there's some athleticism. Maybe you could develop him as a blocker. But because that's the thing is, I didn't even see with Weidemeyer like that he seemed interested in blocking.
Yeah, and at least with Katera, he was a team captain. He seemed like he did play hard. He didn't live up to his athleticism.
I don't have a problem with his game. Like, I have a problem with Weidemeyer's game. I don't have a problem with Katera's game. It's just, when projecting him to the NFL, why do I feel obligated to draft this guy? That's my issue. And I because I have that skill set already on my team, and I don't want to have to ham fist development into a guy that, his ceiling is tight end 3 or 2. I don't know.
I kind of think Katera needs to be an H-back in the NFL, but he doesn't really block. So I don't know if he can be that either. So
that's the thing. If you could get him to block, if somehow you manage to teach this guy to block,
even halfway decent, just get in the way of people,
he would be valuable.
Right. If he's your 3rd tight end with a little bit of athleticism, maybe he could develop it. But we're going to all Cowboys show this. He could be a James Hanna down the road if you could get him to block, right? I just wonder how far away he is from that. But to his credit, everybody says he's a really hard worker. Again, I'm going to mention that he's a team captain. Everybody really likes him. So if you're patient and you can afford to stash him for 2 years on your practice squad or at the end of your roster, why not? Why not?
Absolutely. Clearly he was willing to come back from retirement. Effort is not an issue with him. So if you believe in him, maybe that's enough to kind of take a risk at him a little bit later down in the draft.
So for you, it's Ruckert, Otten, Katera. For me, it's Otten, Ruckert, Katera. But I think the kind of the moral of the show, or the couple podcasts we did, is wait to draft a tight end. Early day 3 is where you want to get your tight end this year, right?
Yeah, I don't know that there is another place to get a tight end. People that are shopping in the 2nd round on day 2, like for these guys, they're intentionally overpaying to get the specific tight end they want. I don't think any of these folks are necessarily worthy of the third round pick, except for maybe Woods, simply because there's an absurd amount of upside there if you can develop it.
Yeah. I don't know if you saw Isaiah Likely yet. Have you watched him yet from Coastal Carolina?
The Coastal Carolina kid? No,
Yeah.
but I mean, I know that he's extremely athletic.
Well, he was athletic when you watch him on the field. Like, he is so good after the catch. He ended up testing with.
He didn't test very well.
No,
he
he's
tested kind of
4 or 40 percentile, I believe, 42 second percentile. Not great.
Yeah.
And I typically love the undersized tight ends. I just worry this is Brevin Jordan 2.0. But
yeah, I mean, there certainly could be that. That's the problem, right? Is a lot of these guys, these undersized tight ends, it's like, if you're going to be that, you need to have like a very high level of athleticism. Like that's to me the whole point. Like, otherwise, why are we drafting these guys? Like,
you know who Isaiah Likely reminded me a lot of is, do you remember watching Hunter Bryant a couple years ago from Washington?
Yeah, from Washington. Yeah. Of course.
Who never played because of a back injury. That's the style of player that I saw. But,
okay.
All right. That is it for today's show. Thank you guys for tuning in. If you want to go back and listen to our other tight end show where we talked about Charlie Kohler and Jalen Weidemeyer, and I don't remember who the other one we talked about was back then, but go listen to that show. We did a deep dive. Woods. Yeah. We did a deep dive on all of those guys. So that's 6 tight ends we watched. Got a feeling Cowboys are going to be picking one of these guys, probably 3rd, 4th round. So we hope it's a good preview ahead of the draft. Follow the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Check us out on YouTube. You can follow the show at Locked On Cowboys. You can follow Landon at McCool PCB. I'm at Marcus _Mosher. We'll see you guys back here on Friday.